The proposal was 14 pages long. David Ade had read hundreds of proposals in his 12 years running Adesanya Logistics, had read them with the practiced speed of a man who knows within the first 2 pages whether a thing is worth his time. He had a system. He read the executive summary, looked at the portfolio, checked the delivery timeline, and made a decision. It rarely took longer than 20 minutes. He had been sitting with this one for 45. It was not that the work was unusually impressive, though it was impressive. NC Studios' portfolio showed 3 completed commercial projects and 2 residential ones, each of them distinguished by a quality he did not immediately have a word for. Something about the way the spaces were arranged that suggested the architect understood not just what a building needed to contain but what the people inside it needed to become. There was a restraint to it, a deliberateness. Nothing in any of these buildings was accidental. He kept returning to the founder's name on the cover page. N. Cole. It was not an uncommon name. There were Coles in professional directories across Lagos. The N could stand for anything. He was being irrational. He was a man who prided himself on not being irrational, and here he was, stalling on a commission worth 12 million naira because of a surname and an initial. He called his assistant and told her to confirm the meeting for Thursday. He went back to his other work and did not think about it again. He was not entirely successful. Thursday came the way Thursdays always come in Lagos. Loud, early, with the particular energy of a city that does not build up to its intensity but simply begins at full volume. David left the house at 7 to beat the traffic, which was optimistic, and arrived at his office on Victoria Island at 8:15, which was the Lagos version of on time. His 9 o'clock was a supplier from Port Harcourt. His 10:30 was his operations manager with the quarterly figures. His 12 o'clock was lunch with Thomas, which had been in both their calendars for 3 weeks and which Thomas would cancel at 11:55, as he always did, and then feel bad about for a day, as he always did. His 3 o'clock was NC Studio. He did not think about the 3 o'clock while he was doing the 9 o'clock or the 10:30. He thought about it during the lunch that Thomas did not cancel. Thomas showed up at 12:10 slightly breathless, with the expression of a man who had fully intended to cancel and then felt the specific guilt of someone who knows they do it too often. "You actually came," David said. "I always come," Thomas said, which was not true and both of them knew it. He sat down and picked up the menu and looked at it without reading it, because they had been coming to this restaurant for 11 years and both of them always ordered the same thing. "What is the 3 o'clock? Architectural firm. Commission for the Lekki building." "Which firm?" "NC Studio. Small, Lekki-based. Good work." Thomas put down the menu. "Who runs it?" David looked at him. It was an odd question, the kind of question that contains something behind it, some already existing knowledge that is trying to decide whether to surface. "N. Cole," David said. "Why?" Thomas picked the menu back up. "Just asking," he said. David watched him for a moment. Thomas was a man who was naturally transparent. His face had never learned to manage what it was feeling with any efficiency, which was one of the reasons David had kept him close for 20 years. Whatever Thomas was feeling right now was not casual curiosity. It was something heavier, something that had the quality of a thing being held. "Thomas," David said. "It's nothing," Thomas said. "Order something. You look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday," David ordered. He watched Thomas eat and talk about other things and not talk about the thing behind his question. He filed it. He would return to it. He always returned to things. NC Studio occupied the top floor of a 3-story building in Lekki Phase 1. Not the flashiest address in Lagos, but a considered one. The kind of address that says we are established enough to choose, but not so established that we need to announce it. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside. The studio inside was not. David arrived at 2:55 and was shown to a conference room by a young man who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been trained to expect that clients arrive slightly early and has prepared accordingly. The room was clean and spare, with a long table and one wall given over entirely to material samples and elevation drawings pinned at precise intervals. The drawings were for a project David did not recognize, not his, and he studied them while he waited. They were extraordinary. There was that word he had been reaching for in the proposal. He found it standing in front of these drawings. The word was honest. The buildings NC Studio designed were honest buildings. They did not perform grandeur they did not have. They did not apologize for their constraints. They simply were what they were, entirely and without compromise, and there was something in that quality that David, who had spent 12 years managing a logistics company in a city that rewarded performance above almost everything else, found unexpectedly moving. He was still looking at the drawings when the door opened. He turned. And then something happened that he would spend the next several months trying to accurately describe and never quite manage. Something that was not recognition exactly, because he did not know this woman, had never worked with her, had met her perhaps once at some family gathering years ago that he could not fully place. But something that was adjacent to recognition. Something that moved through him the way a familiar smell moves through you. Not in the mind, not in any articulable part of the self, but somewhere lower and older than thought. She was 32, perhaps. Medium build with the careful, upright posture of someone who has spent years in spaces where posture communicates authority before words do. Her skin was a warm, deep brown, her face structured and precise. High cheekbones, a jaw that was quietly determined, dark eyes that assessed the room before they assessed the person in it. Her hair was pulled back from her face in a simple style that suggested she had stopped thinking about her hair a long time ago and given the energy to other things. She wore a plain dark suit with no adornments, and she carried a portfolio under one arm and a tablet in her hand, and she crossed the room toward him with a handshake already prepared. "Mr. Ade," she said. "Nora Cole. Thank you for coming." Her voice was level. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes, when they met his, held something he could not immediately read. A composure that was slightly more deliberate than the situation required, as if she had prepared it specifically for this meeting rather than simply bringing it with her the way she brought everything else. He told himself he was imagining it. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "The portfolio is impressive." "Thank you," she said, and set her things on the table and opened the portfolio. "Let me show you what I have in mind for the Lekki site." She presented for 40 minutes. David had sat across from architects before, had commissioned 3 projects in the past 5 years, and had endured the full range of the professional presentation, from the confidently wrong to the impressively right. Nora Cole was in a category he had not previously encountered. She was not performing the presentation. She was simply communicating what she knew in the most direct possible sequence, without ornamentation and without apology, and the effect of this, of someone who had clearly prepared with absolute thoroughness and was now delivering that preparation at its purest, was that David found himself not managing his attention, which was what he usually did in meetings, but simply giving it. She described what she had understood about his company from the brief. She described what she had understood about the building from the site survey. She described the gap between those two things and the specific way she intended to close it. She did not show him mood boards or concept imagery. She showed him plans, elevations, material specifications, a phased delivery timeline with contingencies already built in. She showed him what the building would cost and what it would cost if the timeline slipped and what the recovery plan was if it slipped further. When she finished, she set down her pen and waited. "You have questions," she said. It was not a question. "Several," David said. He asked them. She answered all of them directly, without the particular defensive hedging that architects sometimes deployed when clients asked uncomfortable questions about budget or timeline. When she did not have an answer twice in 40 minutes, she said so and told him when she would have it. He left the meeting with the commission awarded and a start date agreed and a handshake that was as firm at the end as it had been at the beginning. He got into his car and sat in it for several minutes without telling his driver to go anywhere. He was trying to locate the thing that was wrong. Not wrong with the meeting had been entirely right, one of the clearest and most productive he had sat in for months. Wrong with himself, with the specific quality of his attention in that room, the way it had behaved differently from how he usually required it to behave. The way he had found himself, twice in 40 minutes, looking at Nora Cole's face rather than at what she was pointing to. He told his driver to go. He did not call Thomas on the way home, though he thought about it. He thought, "I will call Thomas tomorrow." He did not call Thomas the next day either. Nora Cole did not watch him leave. She waited until she heard the car in the street below, the particular sound of a departure, and then she crossed to the window and looked at the roof of the car as it moved away from the building and out of her sight line. She stood at the window for longer than was necessary. Her assistant appeared in the doorway. "Good meeting. Commissions confirmed," Nora said. She turned from the window. "Start the Adesanya file. I want the full site survey rescheduled for next week." "Done. Anything else?" "No," she said. "That's everything." Her assistant left. Nora stood in the conference room with the drawings on the wall and the portfolio on the table and the specific quality of silence that follows a thing you have been preparing for without knowing you were preparing for it. She had known it was his company from the moment the brief arrived. The name was not a coincidence. There was only one Adesanya Logistics in Lagos, and she had known its CEO's name for 10 years. The way you know the name of something that was almost part of your life and then was not. She had told herself she would decline the commission. She had prepared the decline. She had the email drafted. She had even decided on the reason she would give: capacity, existing commitments, a timeline conflict that was plausible and uncheckable. She had not sent it. She had asked herself, in the 3 weeks between the brief arriving and today's meeting, what she was doing. She had asked herself carefully, in the precise way she asked herself all important questions. Stripping out the emotion, looking at the structure of it, trying to identify what she actually wanted versus what she was telling herself she wanted. She had not arrived at a clean answer. What she had arrived at was this. She had spent 10 years building a life on the basis of a decision that was made for her without her consent, and she was 32 years old, and she was tired of organizing herself around an absence she had never chosen. She did not know what taking this commission would give her. She did not know what she was looking for in the space of it. But she knew she was looking for something. And she knew, from 10 years of building things, that you do not find what a space contains by standing outside it. She picked up her portfolio. She went back to work. The thing about twins is that the people who love them spend years learning the differences and then spend the rest of their lives wondering if they ever truly did. Rita Cole had been learning the differences between herself and her sister since she was old enough to understand they were separate people. Nora was the one who finished sentences. Rita was the one who started them and then changed direction midway. Nora kept her desk ordered. Rita kept her desk honest, which was a different thing. Nora decided quickly and stayed decided. Rita decided slowly and revisited constantly. Nora's grief was silent. Rita's was loud and then over. These were the differences. They ran deeper than anyone who had not grown up inside them could understand. The way they looked was not a difference. The way they looked was identical: same height, same build, same warm, deep brown skin with the same high cheekbones and the same determined jaw and the same dark eyes. Same hands. Same particular way of tilting their heads when they were listening carefully. Same laugh, which was rare in both of them for different reasons. 10 years ago, their mother had stood this fact on its head and used it as a tool. Rita did not think about that morning often. Or rather, she thought about it constantly in the way that something you have fully suppressed becomes a constant low frequency, always present, never audible, shaping everything around it without ever showing itself directly. She had been 22. She had been told, at 6 in the morning on a Saturday in November, that her sister was not well and could not go through with the ceremony, and that Rita would stand in her place and that it would be explained later. It was not explained later. Rita had stood at the altar in her sister's dress. They were the same size, had always been the same size, which was the specific detail that still visited her sometimes in the middle of the night, and had looked at the man she was marrying and had thought, with the clarity of someone in shock, "He does not know. He is looking at me and he thinks he knows who I am and he does not know." She had said nothing. She had said "I do" instead. She had told herself, in the weeks that followed, that she would tell the truth when her mother gave her the explanation she had been promised. The explanation did not come. She told herself she would tell the truth when the right moment arrived. The right moment did not arrive, or she told herself it did not, which was a different thing. The months became a year. The year became 5. The 5 became 10. And Rita Cole, who had started this story as someone who said yes when she should have said wait, had built a real life out of the yes. A husband she had come to love in the specific way you love someone you have chosen to love, even when the choosing did not start cleanly, 2 children who were entirely hers, a home that was genuinely her home, a marriage that was imperfect and functional and real. She had told herself the realness of what came after was what mattered. She still believed this, mostly. David came home that Thursday evening quieter than usual. Not withdrawn, he was not a withdrawn man, but quieter. Rita noticed it the way she noticed most things about him, which was with the particular attentiveness of a woman who has spent 10 years learning a person she did not expect to learn and has discovered, somewhere in the middle of that learning, that she is genuinely interested in the outcome. She asked him about the meeting over dinner. He told her about the commission, about NC Studio, about the architect who had presented with unusual clarity and directness. He did not describe Nora beyond professionally, said only that she was good at what she did, that the meeting had been productive, that he felt the commission was in capable hands. Rita listened to all of this. She said that it sounded promising, that the Lecky building had needed attention for 2 years and it was good that he had finally found someone for it. She did not say, "I know that name." She did not say, "There is only one family named Cole in Lagos with a daughter who runs an architectural firm." She did not say any of the things that were true. She cleared the plates and put the children to bed and sat in the kitchen afterward with a cup of tea she did not drink, looking at the surface of the table, while David worked in his study down the hall. She had made tea she did not drink many times in this kitchen. She had never thought about it until now. The making of it, the sitting with it, the washing of the cup without having touched it. The habit of preparing a comfort she did not let herself take. She sat there for a long time. Then she washed the cup, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. She lay in the dark beside her husband and thought about a Saturday morning in November 10 years ago, and about the specific sentence her mother had used. It will be explained later, and about the fact that later had now, apparently, arrived. Not because anyone had explained anything. Because David had gone to a meeting. Because the world, which does not hurry for anyone, had simply arranged for the thing to surface in its own time, in the way that submerged things eventually surface. Not because anyone lifts them, but because that is what submerged things do. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. Nora received a WhatsApp message from a number she did not have saved at 11:15 that night. The message said, "This is Thomas. We need to talk. Not about work. About the commission you just took." She looked at the message for a moment. Then she typed, "How did you get this number?" The reply came quickly. "David mentioned he met with NC Studio today. I asked around. I'm sorry for the late message. It's important." Nora put the phone face down on her desk. She sat very still. Thomas, David's oldest friend. She knew who Thomas was, had known his name for 10 years, the way she knew the names of most things adjacent to the life that had been arranged for her and then taken away. She had never spoken to him. She had certainly never expected him to find her number and message her at 11:15 on a Thursday night with the specific quality of urgency that his message carried. She picked the phone back up. She typed, "Tomorrow, 8 o'clock, my office." She put the phone down. She sat at her desk in the studio she had built from a borrowed desk in a shared workspace 6 years ago, in the building she had moved into when the firm finally had enough in the account to justify it, with the drawings for David Aid's flagship building on the table in front of her, and she thought about what it meant that things were beginning to move. She had taken the commission knowing they would move. She had understood that much, even when she could not articulate what she was looking for. What she had not understood, what she was understanding now, at 11:15 on a Thursday night, with a message from a man she had never met sitting on her phone, was how quickly. She turned off the desk lamp. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she gathered her things and went home. Tomorrow would be complicated. She had built a career on managing complicated things. She went home and she slept. Thomas arrived at NC Studio at 7:58. Nora had the coffee already made, not as hospitality because this was not a hospitality situation, but because she needed something to do with her hands while she waited, and making coffee was the most honest version of that need. She heard him on the stairs. She heard him pause at the studio door, the way people pause at doors when they are about to say something they have been holding for a long time and are doing one final check of whether they are actually going to say it. Then he knocked. "It's open," she said. He was 40, perhaps 41. Medium build, the kind of face that would have been unremarkable except for the quality of attention it held. He was a man who listened with his whole face, which was rarer than it should be. He wore a plain shirt and looked like he had not slept well, which she suspected was accurate. He sat down across from her at the table without being invited to, which she noted. It was not rudeness. It was the movement of someone who has passed the point where social ceremony feels available to them. "You know who I am," he said. "David's oldest friend," she said. "Thomas." "Yes." He looked at her. "You know who he is." "I know who he is," she said. "I've known for 10 years. He let out a breath. It was the breath of someone who has been holding a specific weight and has just been told they can set it down. Not all the way, not yet, but enough to feel the change. "Then you know what the commission means." "I know what it could mean," she said carefully. "I don't know yet what it does mean. That's part of why I took it, actually. I needed to understand something." "What?" She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "Whether I was angry," she said. "I've spent 10 years not being sure. Whether what I feel is grief or anger or just," she paused. "Just the specific feeling of having had something arranged without you and then having it taken away, also without you. And I needed to be in the same room as it. As the evidence of it. To know." Thomas looked at her for a moment. "And I haven't decided yet," she said. "The meeting was 3 days ago." He was quiet. He looked at the drawings on the wall, the elevation studies for David's building, pinned up since the day after the meeting. He looked at them for long enough that Nora understood he was not actually looking at the drawings but at something behind them, some internal reckoning she was not privy to. "I've known for 5 years," he said finally. "You told someone who told someone who—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter how. The point is I've known for 5 years that David married the wrong twin and I have not told him. And I need you to understand what that has cost me before you decide I'm the enemy here." Nora looked at him. "I don't think you're the enemy," she said. "I don't think there is an enemy. That's the complicated part of this whole thing. There's no villain to point at. There's just a decision that was made over our heads and then a set of consequences that nobody planned." "Your mother planned it." "My mother panicked," Nora said. The word came out with an edge she had not entirely intended. She set it down. "She panicked and she made a decision she thought was protecting something and she was wrong and she has spent 10 years knowing she was wrong without ever saying so. That's not villainy. That's cowardice. Which is worse, actually. But it's a different thing." Thomas was quiet. "Why are you here?" Nora said. Not unkindly. Directly. "You've held this for 5 years. Why now?" He looked at her. "Because he went to that meeting and came home and sat at dinner and I could see something had shifted in him. Something he couldn't name. And I know David. I've known him for 20 years. And when David can't name something he just keeps turning it over quietly until he can. And when he can..." He stopped again. "I needed you to know it was coming. Whatever it is. I needed you to not be unprepared." Nora sat with that. She sat with the specific weight of it. A man who had held a secret for 5 years arriving at her door before 7 in the morning to tell her. Not the secret, but that the secret was about to stop being containable. Because he thought she deserved the warning. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Thomas nodded. He stood. He picked up his jacket. At the door he stopped. "He's a good man," he said. "I'm not saying that to... I'm not making a case. I'm just telling you so you know. He's a good man who has been living in the wrong room his whole adult life without understanding why the proportions feel slightly off." He left. Nora sat alone in the studio with her coffee going cold and the elevation drawings on the wall and the specific knowledge that things were moving now the way they move when they have been still for too long, with a momentum that no longer belongs to anyone. She turned to her desk. She had a building to design. Rita called their mother on a Tuesday. Not to talk about it. Rita never called their mother to talk about it because talking about it required naming it, and naming it required having a conversation that Rita had been postponing for 10 years with a thoroughness that had, over time, become its own form of commitment. She called about the children, her son's school performance, her daughter's recent bout of fever that had turned out to be minor. Her mother asked the questions that mothers ask and Rita answered them, and for 22 minutes they talked about nothing that mattered, which was the only way they knew how to talk to each other anymore. Then, at the 23rd minute, Rita said, "David commissioned an architectural firm for the Lecky building." A pause. Barely half a second. Anyone else would have missed it. Rita did not miss it. That's good, her mother said, carefully. Which firm? NC Studio, Rita said. Based in Lekki. Apparently the work is very impressive. Another pause. Slightly longer. Good, her mother said. He's needed to do something with that building for 2 years. The founder is someone called N. Cole, Rita said. She said it the way you place a stone on a table, deliberately watching where it lands. Isn't that a coincidence? Silence. Not the silence of someone who does not know what to say. The silence of someone who knows exactly what to say and is calculating whether to say it. Rita, her mother said. Mama, Rita said. And the single word, her mother's title in her mouth, held every year of the 23 minutes that had come before it and every conversation they had not had in 10 years and every morning she had woken up beside a man who did not know the most fundamental fact of his marriage. We should talk, her mother said. We should have talked 10 years ago, Rita said. Her mother was quiet. I'll come on Saturday, Rita said, and ended the call. She sat with her phone in her hand in the kitchen that was hers, the kitchen she had chosen, the house she had furnished, the life she had built from the yes she had said when she should have said wait, and she felt something she did not have a clean name for. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. Something more complicated than anger, something that had anger in it and grief in it and the specific exhaustion of a person who has been managing a thing for 10 years and has just decided they are done managing it. She put the phone on the counter. She went to collect her daughter from school. She would manage this one last thing, and then she would stop managing. The commission proceeded the way good professional relationships proceed, with a clarity and momentum that made everything else feel slightly more possible by contrast. Nora met with David 3 times in the first month. Site visits, primarily, with one meeting at his office to review the revised plans. Each meeting was professional. Each meeting was productive. Each meeting left David slightly more unsettled than the last in a way he was increasingly unable to attribute to anything in the meeting itself. She was good at her work. That was not the problem. The problem, if it was a problem and he was not yet sure it was that she was good at her work in a way that reminded him of something he could not locate. Something in the specificity of her attention, the way she moved through a space reading it with her whole body rather than just her eyes. Something in the way she held silences during site visits while she was thinking, not uncomfortable silences, but the particular kind of silence that a person generates when they are in genuine conversation with a space rather than simply assessing it. He mentioned it to Thomas after the second site visit. Thomas was at David's office. They had fallen back into the habit of weekly lunches, partly because Thomas had realized he was canceling too many of them and felt guilty about it, and partly because something in him wanted to be close to the situation without being inside it. She's unusual, David said. As a professional, I can't. I keep trying to identify what it is exactly and I can't. Thomas looked at his food. Thomas. What? You're doing the thing. I don't know what thing you mean. The thing where your face goes still when you're deciding not to say something, David said. You've been doing it since the day I mentioned the commission. What do you know? Thomas looked up. His face was doing exactly what David had described, the particular stillness of a man who has rehearsed multiple versions of this moment and is trying to locate which one is the right one. David, he said. He stopped. Tried again. There's something I should have told you. I've been working out how to tell you and I haven't found the right way and I'm starting to think the right way might not exist. David set down his fork. He looked at Thomas with the quality of attention that his wife had learned to read over 10 years and his oldest friend had learned to read over 20. The specific stillness of a man who has identified that something important is about to be said and is giving it the full space of his attention. Tell me, he said. Not here, Thomas said. Come to mine. Tonight. I'll tell you tonight. David looked at him for a long moment. All right, he said. He picked up his fork. He finished his food. He did not ask anything else. That was the thing about David that Thomas had always both admired and found slightly frightening. When he said all right, he meant it. He had decided to wait for tonight and he would wait for tonight and in the hours between now and then he would do his work and manage his company and be present for whatever else the day required of him. Because he had learned in 35 years that patience was not the absence of urgency but the decision to apply urgency correctly. Thomas watched him finish his food and felt, Not for the first time, the specific guilt of a man who has been carrying something on behalf of a person who deserved to know it and has run out of reasons to keep carrying it. Tonight, then, David arrived at Thomas's flat at 8. Thomas had cooked badly in the distracted way of someone whose mind is elsewhere, and they sat with the food between them, and Thomas talked around the thing for 20 minutes in the way that people talk around things they have rehearsed and then found they cannot begin. David waited. He was good at waiting. Then Thomas said, "The woman at NC Studio, Nora Cole. She had a twin sister." David was still. "Her name is Rita," Thomas said. "Rita Cole. You've been married to her for 10 years. The room did not change. The food was still on the table. The lamp was still on. Lagos was still outside the window doing what Lagos always does, indifferent to the specific internal seismic event happening in this flat." David said nothing for a long time. "How long have you known?" he said. 5 years. David looked at him. The expression was not anger or not yet. It was something that preceded anger. Something quieter and in some ways more serious. The expression of a man whose very precise internal map of his life has just been shown to contain a fundamental error, and who is running the implications forward in real time. "Nora told someone," Thomas said. "Years ago, 5 years in, when she was exhausted and it came out at a dinner she didn't intend it to. It got back to me through a mutual contact. David, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to." "Don't," David said, quietly. "Not tonight. I need to, just not tonight." He stood. He put on his jacket. "The wedding," he said, standing, not looking at Thomas. "I met her once. Before. At a family gathering. Her family and mine. We barely spoke. The arrangement was between our fathers." "Yes," Thomas said. "I thought Rita was the one they had arranged for me. I had no reason to think otherwise." He paused. "Does she know? Does Rita know what happened?" Thomas looked at him. "She was there," he said. "She was told it was temporary, that it would be explained. It was never explained." David absorbed this. He absorbed it the way he absorbed all significant information, completely without deflecting any of it, letting it land where it needed to land. "And Nora?" he said. "She was told to leave," Thomas said. "The night before the wedding. She didn't know why. She left the next morning and she didn't go back." David stood at the door of Thomas's flat and looked at a middle distance that contained 10 years of a marriage. He thought he understood, and a woman he had hired 3 weeks ago, whose drawings were on his company's wall, and a decision made by people who were not him that had shaped every adult day of his life. "I'm going home," he said. "David, I'm going home," he said again. "I'm not going to do anything tonight. I'm going to go home and I'm going to think. And tomorrow I'll know what to do." He left. Thomas sat in his kitchen with the uneaten food on the table and the specific relief and guilt of a man who has finally put down something he should never have agreed to carry, and understood that putting it down does not make the consequences anyone else's problem. David drove home slowly. Not because the traffic required it. The traffic at 8:30 on a weeknight in his neighborhood was manageable. He drove slowly because he needed the time between Thomas's flat and his front door to do something with what he was carrying. He drove and he thought. He thought about Rita, about 10 years of waking up beside her, of learning her, of building a life with her. About the specific quality of her laugh, which he had always found slightly effortful, as if she was working to produce it rather than simply having it. About the way she held things. Tightly, both hands always slightly more tightly than seemed necessary for the thing being held. He had always thought this was her nature. He understood now it might be something else. He thought about the morning of his wedding. He had been 25. The arrangement had been made through their fathers, a business alliance formalized through marriage, which was not unusual in the world he had grown up in, and which he had accepted with the equanimity of a man who had not yet learned to distrust the arrangements made on his behalf. He had met the woman he was to marry once, briefly, at a gathering 6 months before the wedding. She had been quiet, contained. He had thought, "She seems capable." He had thought, "This could work." He had not thought, "Is this the right woman?" Because he had not known there were two. He thought about Nora Cole in her conference room, presenting for 40 minutes with the particular quality of honesty he had noticed in her work before he ever saw her face. He thought about the site visits, about the silence she generated when she was thinking, about the way something in him had been pulling toward her in a way he had attributed to professional respect and had not examined further because he was a man who did not examine things he was not ready to examine. He pulled up to his house. The kitchen light was on. Rita was still awake. He could see her shadow moving behind the window. He sat in the car for several minutes. He was not a man who ran from things. He was not a man who shouted at things. He was a man who went toward things, slowly and completely, with his full attention, and said what was true. He was going to have to go toward this. Not tonight. He had said not tonight and he had meant it. But soon. He got out of the car and went inside. Rita was at the kitchen counter, making tea she probably also would not drink. She turned when she heard him and her face did what her face always did, arranged itself into the warmth she had practiced for 10 years, the warmth that was, he now understood, both real and effortful at the same time. Late, she said. Thomas, he said. Lost track of time. She nodded. She poured the tea. She offered him a cup and he took it and they stood in their kitchen and drank tea that was too hot and talked about nothing in particular, the way people who have built a life together talk about nothing in particular at the end of a day, and David looked at his wife over the rim of his cup and understood that she knew something was different. He could see it. He had learned her well enough to see it. She knew. Not what he knew, not yet. But she could feel the change in the air the way people can always feel the change in the air when something that has been still for a long time begins to move. He finished his tea. He went to bed. He lay in the dark beside a woman he had built a life with and did not know was not the woman he had arranged to marry. He did not sleep. 3 weeks into the commission, Nora made a site visit alone. She had sent her associate for the previous 2. There was a specific phase of any build where her physical presence was not yet necessary, where what was needed was someone to document and report rather than to assess, but this visit was different. The structural queries from the contractor required her eyes directly, and besides, she had told herself she needed to be there alone, which was a different kind of necessity. She walked the site in the early morning before the contractors arrived. The Lecky building was a shell at this stage, the bones of what it would become visible but not yet clothed. She moved through it the way she moved through all spaces at this stage, which was slowly and with her hands sometimes touching the walls, the way a doctor reads a body through touch rather than sight alone. She was in the space that would become the main entrance atrium when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. David was standing at the edge of the space in the early morning light, his jacket on, his hands in his pockets. He had not been expected. She had not been told he was coming. He looked at her across the empty atrium, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was slightly too long for professional courtesy. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "I didn't know I was coming until this morning," he said. "I needed to see the space." He looked around at the bare walls, the exposed structure, the light coming through the gaps where windows would go. "It looks different without the drawings." "It always does," she said. He walked into the space. He moved through it the way people who are not architects move through unfinished buildings. Slightly uncertain, slightly aware that they are in a place that has not yet decided what it is. He stopped in the center of what would become the atrium and looked up. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead. When you design a space like this, a public atrium, somewhere that a lot of people will move through every day, what are you actually trying to give them? The people who use it. What is the intention behind the design?" Nora looked at him. It was not the question she had expected. It was, she thought, a genuine question rather than a performative one. The question of a man who was actually thinking about something and wanted an answer rather than a conversation. "Orientation," she said. "Mostly, people in unfamiliar spaces are always slightly lost, even when they know where they're going. A good atrium gives them a moment of orientation, tells them where they are, which way the light is coming from, how large the world is on the other side of the entrance. It gives them," she paused, finding the right word. "It gives them ground to stand on before anything else is asked of them." David looked at her. "That's what you're trying to build," he said. "Not a question. Something else." "That's what every building is trying to build," she said. "At the best version of itself. Ground to stand on." He looked at the space for another moment. Then he said, "I know who you are." The words landed in the atrium the way words land in empty spaces. Clearly, without the softening of furniture or carpet, with the full sound of themselves. Nora was very still. "Thomas told me," he said, "3 weeks ago. I needed some time before He stopped. "Tried again. I'm not here to. I don't know what I'm here for, actually. I just needed to tell you that I know. Because it felt dishonest to keep working together without saying so." Nora looked at him across the empty space of the building she was constructing for the company of the man who had married her sister in her place. She thought about what Thomas had said. A good man who has been living in the wrong room his whole adult life without understanding why the proportions feel slightly off. She thought about the ground to stand on. About what she had just said 2 minutes ago, about what a building is trying to give the people who enter it. "I know," she said. "You've always known," he said. "Since the brief arrived," she said. "Before that, actually. Your company's name has been. I've known the name for 10 years. Why did you take the commission?" he said. It was not an accusation. It was the question underneath all the other questions, the one he had actually come here to ask. Nora was quiet for a moment. "Because I needed to understand whether I was angry," she said. "I told Thomas that too. I don't do things I don't understand. I needed to be in the space of it, to know what it actually was. And," he said. She looked at the bare walls of the atrium, at the light coming through the gaps, at all the open space of a building that was not yet what it was going to be. "I'm not angry," she said. "I don't think I ever was, really. I think I was just someone who had something arranged for her and then arranged away from her, and I spent 10 years not entirely understanding what I had lost because I had never fully had it." He was quiet. "What I want to know," she said, "is what actually happened. Not the version I've been carrying for 10 years, the full version. What was arranged and why, and what my mother knew and when she knew it." She paused. "And then I want to know what you're going to do." "I don't know yet," he said. "What I'm going to do." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to know yet. I'm just telling you what I need." He looked at her. "That's fair," he said. They stood in the empty atrium in the early morning, in the space between what had been arranged for them and what they had built without knowing what they were building toward, and the light came through the gaps where the windows would go, and Lagos moved outside in its ordinary indifferent way, and neither of them said anything else for a while. It was not a comfortable silence, but it was an honest one. And for two people who had both spent a long time in rooms where the proportions were slightly wrong, an honest silence was, at least, a place to stand. Rita drove to her mother's house on Saturday morning alone. She had told David she was taking the children to her sister-in-law's, which was true, she had arranged it, and that she had some errands after. He had nodded. He had been nodding at things for 3 weeks in the way of a man whose attention is somewhere else and who is performing its presence well enough that most people would not notice. Rita noticed. She had learned him too well not to. She drove through Lagos in the Saturday morning traffic, which was lighter than weekday traffic but still dense enough to require attention, and she gave the traffic her attention and gave the rest of herself to the conversation she had been preparing for 10 years. Her mother lived in the same house she had always lived in, the house Rita and Nora had grown up in, a solid, well-maintained property in a quiet part of Lagos that felt, every time Rita visited, slightly smaller than she remembered it. As if the house were also doing its own accounting of the years, subtracting something with each return. Mama Cole was in the kitchen when Rita arrived. She was cooking, not because it was mealtime, but because cooking was what her mother did when she was managing anxiety, which Rita had understood since she was 12. The kitchen smelled of onions and stock and the specific warmth of something on a low flame. Rita sat at the kitchen table. Her mother kept cooking. "You could have told me you were coming earlier," her mother said. Her voice was level, carefully level. "I told you Saturday," Rita said. "It's Saturday." Her mother turned from the stove. She looked at her daughter, at the daughter who had stood at an altar in the wrong dress and said the right words and then held everything together for 10 years with both hands and had arrived this morning looking, for the first time in as long as she could remember, like a woman who had decided to put something down. "Sit," Rita said, though she was the one who was sitting and her mother was the one standing, and they both understood that sit was not really about position. Her mother sat, The conversation took 2 hours. Not because there was that much to say, the facts of what had happened fit into 20 minutes, but because facts are not the thing that takes time. What takes time is everything that has been built on top of the facts. The decisions made in their shadow, the relationships shaped around them, the years of ordinary life that proceeded from an original act as if the original act were solid ground. Rita did not cry. She had cried about this, privately over the years, in bathrooms and in her car and once in the storeroom at the children's school when something had caught her unexpectedly. She had used up the crying version of this conversation. What she had left was the accurate version. She told her mother what she knew. She told her what she had been living with. She told her what it had felt like to stand at that altar and say I do to a man who did not know who she was, and what it had felt like every day for 10 years to wake up inside the consequence of that. Her mother listened. She was, Rita noticed, not defending herself. She was listening the way a person listens when they have run out of defenses and have decided, perhaps for the first time, to simply receive what is true. When Rita finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I thought I was protecting the family. I know, Rita said. The clause in the arrangement. If the marriage didn't go through, your father's company. I know, Rita said again. I worked it out years ago. I'm not here for the explanation, Mama. I already understand it. What I have needed for 10 years, is for you to say it. Out loud. To say what you did. Her mother looked at her hands. I arranged for your sister to be taken away the night before her wedding, she said. I put you in her place without telling either of you the full truth. I told Nora she was not well and the arrangement had changed. I told you it was temporary and would be explained. She paused. It was not temporary. It was never explained. Another pause. Longer. I am sorry. I have been sorry for 10 years and I did not know how to say it without it being real, Rita said. Yes, her mother said. Very quietly. Rita sat with that for a moment. Nora built something, Rita said. She built it from nothing after you sent her away without knowing why. She built it alone. She looked at her mother. I need you to know that. Whatever you were protecting. She lost 10 years of her life because of it. She lost. She lost the version of her life that might have been. And she had to construct another one with her own hands. And she did, and she should not have had to. Her mother's eyes were bright. I know, she said. And David, Rita said. David has been living inside a lie for 10 years. Not a lie he made. A lie that was made for him. And he is a good man, Mama. Whatever else. He is a good man who deserved to know who he was marrying. Her mother nodded. She could not speak. Rita looked at her. She looked at the woman who had panicked at 5 in the morning with a wedding in 6 hours and made a decision that had rippled forward into every subsequent day of 3 people's lives. She looked at the specific smallness of how it had started, fear, not malice, a financial clause and a daughter who refused, and the specific largeness of what it had become. She did not forgive her mother in that kitchen. Forgiveness was not something she could produce on a Saturday morning over onions and stock. But she said, You're going to call Nora. Her mother looked at her. Today, Rita said. You are going to call her today and you are going to say to her what you just said to me. Not a version of it. That. Her mother nodded. Rita stood. She picked up her bag. I don't know what happens to my marriage, she said at the door. She said it plainly, without drama, the way you state a fact about weather. I don't know what David decides or what I decide, or what any of this looks like in a year. But I know that it has to be decided in the open now. With all of it on the table. That's the only way it can be real. She left. She sat in her car in her mother's driveway for a moment, in the Saturday morning Lagos warmth, and she felt something she had not felt in 10 years and did not immediately recognize. Took her a moment to identify it. It was lightness. The specific, unfamiliar lightness of a person who has set down something very heavy and is still adjusting to the change in their own weight. She started the car. She drove home. David was in his study when Rita returned. She stood in the doorway. He looked up from his desk. They looked at each other in the way of 2 people who have been circling something for weeks and have both, separately, arrived at the same decision about whether to keep circling. I went to see my mother, Rita said. David was still. I know that you know, she said. I've known that you know for 3 weeks. I could see it. And I've been waiting to see what you would do with it before I said anything. Which was, she paused. Which was probably not the right thing to do. But I needed to know that you knew before I could say any of this. He turned his chair to face her fully. He said nothing. He was giving her the room to finish. The night before the wedding, she said. Mama told me at 6 in the morning that Nora was not well and could not go through with it. She said I would stand in. She said it was temporary. She said it would be explained. She stopped. I was 22. I was afraid. She was my mother and she was telling me it would be fine. And she stopped again. The sentence did not have a comfortable end. I said yes. I went. And then every day for 10 years I woke up and told myself that the real thing we had built was what mattered and not how we got there. David looked at her. His face held something she had rarely seen in it. Not anger, not even the precursor to anger. Something quieter than that. Something that had the quality of a man who has been sorting through a very complex set of facts for 3 weeks and has arrived at something that is not resolution but is close to understanding. Did you love me? He said. In the beginning. Did you? He stopped. Tried again. When you stood at the altar, was there anything real in it? For you? Rita looked at him. No, she said. And then, but there was later. There was real later. The children are real. The years are real. What I feel for you now is real. It is just, it started wrong. And I have been pretending the start didn't matter. She paused. It matters. Yes, he said. It does. They sat in the particular silence of 2 people who have finally arrived at the honest version of a conversation that has been waiting 10 years to be had. It was not a gentle silence. It was the silence of something true. What do you want? Rita said. Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? David was quiet for a long time. I want to understand what the last 10 years were, he said finally. I need to know whether what we built was built on nothing or whether it was built on something real that happened to start badly. And I can't know that from inside it. I think I need, he stopped. I think I need some time outside of it, to see it clearly. Rita nodded. She had expected something close to this. She had spent 3 weeks in the part of herself she did not show anyone, preparing for something close to this. Okay, she said. I'm not saying it's over, he said. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm saying I can't see it from here. I know, she said. I understand. She left the study. She went to the kitchen. She made tea again. Another cup of tea she would not drink. Another entry in the long record of her life's undrunk tea. And she stood at the counter and looked at the kitchen that was hers and thought about what real meant. She thought, real is not the same as right. Real is what was built with genuine material by genuine people, regardless of the foundation. The foundation was wrong. What was built on top of it was not nothing. She thought, I know this to be true. What I don't know is whether it is enough. She drank the tea. All of it, standing at the counter in the Saturday afternoon light. She was done with things she did not finish. Nora was at the studio on Saturday. She often was, in the way of people who have built their work into the architecture of their weekends without noticing. When her phone rang, she did not recognize the number immediately. She answered anyway. Nora, her mother said. The word, just her name, in her mother's voice, which she had not heard directed at her specifically in a very long time, landed in the way that simple things land when they carry the weight of everything behind them. Mama, she said. A long pause. Then her mother said, I owe you something I have owed you for 10 years. Rita came to see me this morning. She made me understand what I have been refusing to understand. Nora sat down. She had not planned to sit down. Her legs made the decision independently. Tell me, she said. Her mother told her. Not the version Nora had carried. The incomplete, context-free version of being told the night before a wedding that things had changed and she should go to her aunt's house. The full version. The financial clause. The decision made at 5 in the morning. the specific fear that had driven it and the specific failure of courage that had sustained it through 10 years of silence. Nora listened to all of it without speaking. When her mother finished, the studio was very quiet. Outside, Lagos was doing what it always did, loud, various, indifferent. Inside, Nora sat at her desk with the phone in her hand and let the full shape of the thing she had been carrying land properly for the first time. She had always known the shape of it in the intellectual sense. She had known she had been removed, that it had been arranged, that the arrangement had been financial. But knowing the shape of something and feeling its actual weight are different things. She felt the actual weight now, sitting in the studio she had built, in the life she had constructed from nothing, in the 10 years of mornings that had proceeded from a decision made without her by people who were afraid. She felt it, and then she set it down. Not because she had decided to forgive, she was not there yet and she was not going to pretend she was, but because she had carried it for 10 years and she was 32 years old and she was not willing to carry it into 33. "I hear you," she said to her mother. I can't tell you it's okay. It's not okay. What you did was not okay, and I need you to know that I know that, and that me knowing that is not going to change." "I know," her mother said. "But," Nora said, "I also need you to know that I'm all right. What I built, what I have, it's mine, fully mine, and I'm not willing to let the fact that it started badly make it feel like less than it is." Her mother was quiet. "I'll come and see you," Nora said. "Not today, but soon. We'll find out what we are to each other now. It will be different from what it was. But I'd rather have the different real version than the same false one." She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the studio with her hands in her lap. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work on the Lecky building. She had a ground floor to finish. David called her the following Wednesday. He called at 6 in the evening, which was, she had learned, his version of a considered time. Not so late as to be inappropriate, not so early as to suggest urgency he had not yet earned the right to claim. "I spoke to Rita," he said. "She told me everything. Her version. I want to hear yours." "All right," she said. "Not on the phone," he said. "Can we? The site is quieter in the mornings, before the contractors arrive. Could we?" "Thursday," she said. 7:30. "I'll be there," he said. He was there at 7:20, which she had expected. He was a man who arrived early when something mattered to him, which told her something about how he held this. They walked the site together in the early morning. She showed him what had changed since the last visit. The framing of the atrium was beginning to take shape, the bones of the space becoming readable. He looked at it with the quality of attention she had noticed from the beginning, the specific attentiveness of a man who wants to understand a thing rather than simply to assess it. When they reached the center of what would be the atrium, he stopped. "Tell me what happened," he said. "From the beginning," she told him, plainly, in the way she told all important things, in the correct sequence, without ornamentation, with only the facts that were necessary and all of them. The night before the wedding, what her mother had said, the morning she had packed her things, the way she had not gone back, the years that had followed. He listened without interrupting. His face, throughout, was the face she had come to recognize over the weeks of the commission. Present, contained, processing rather than performing. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "You didn't do it," she said. "No," he said. "But it was done in the context of my family's arrangement. And I think I should have asked more questions. At the beginning, I accepted things I should have questioned." He paused. "I was 25 and I thought accepting the arrangement was the same as being responsible. I understand now it isn't." Nora looked at him. "What happens now?" she said. "Rita and we're taking some time," he said. We haven't decided anything, but we needed space to see clearly. She's handling it better than I would have. She's a much clearer person than most people understand." "She always was," Nora said, and felt, saying it, the specific weight of 10 years of not having said her sister's name to anyone who knew them both. David looked at her. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is that you don't know. Go ahead." The commission, he said, taking it. Were you looking for something specific? From me? Or from... What were you looking for? Nora was quiet for a moment. I was looking for ground to stand on, she said. I said that to you the first time we were here together. I meant it more literally than you knew. I needed to stand in the proximity of the thing that was arranged for me and then taken away and understand what it actually was. Whether it was a loss or just an event that happened. And, he said, she looked at the atrium rising around them, at the light coming through the framings where the windows would go, at the space that was becoming what it was always meant to become, slowly, with the right materials in the correct sequence. It was a loss, she said, but it was also the beginning of everything I built. And I'm not sure you can separate those two things. I'm not sure I want to. He was quiet. I'm not asking you for anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. I didn't take this commission to whatever you are deciding about your marriage, that is yours to decide. Between you and Rita, I have no claim on the outcome of it. I just needed to understand my own part of it. I know, he said. They stood in the atrium in the early morning. Can I keep the commission? He said. And the question, the simple professional question, asked with a slight roughness at the edge of it that she had not heard from him before, made her understand that it was not entirely a professional question. Yes, she said. Then I'll let you get to work, he said. He left the way he had arrived, quietly, with the particular deliberateness of a man who does not waste his movements. She watched him go. She stood in the atrium a moment longer. Then she began. What followed was not a tidy resolution. Nora would have told you herself, if you had asked, that she was suspicious of tidy resolutions, had spent 6 years as an architect learning that the spaces that felt most true were the ones that had been allowed to find their own form rather than forced into a shape that looked correct from outside. The months that came after the site visit had that quality. They were not tidy, but they were honest, which was the better thing. Rita and David took the time they had agreed to take. They did not announce it to anyone outside their immediate circle. They did not dramatize it. They lived, for a period, with the question of what their marriage was once the full truth of it was in the room, and the question was painful and necessary and did not resolve quickly. What they found, in the course of finding it, was that 10 years of real things had accumulated between them, real enough to be worth understanding, even if the origin of them was wrong. They did not decide what that meant immediately. They let it be a question for a while, which was the honest thing to do. Chief Cole found out on a Sunday evening when Mama Cole finally told him. He sat in his chair in the sitting room and was quiet for a long time. He was a man who moved slowly through difficult information, which Rita had always thought of as a limitation and was beginning to understand was a form of respect for the difficulty of the information. He said very little that evening. But the following week he called David himself. A call that lasted 40 minutes, the contents of which David never fully disclosed, but which he described to Thomas afterward as one of the most painful and most necessary conversations of his adult life. Thomas, for his part, found that the specific weight he had been carrying for 5 years did not immediately lift when he put it down. It reduced. Gradually, over weeks, it reduced to something manageable. He understood, in the course of this reduction, that the carrying had not been his responsibility but that he had chosen to carry it anyway, and that this choice, even with the best of intentions, had made him a party to the silence in ways he was still accounting for. He was not easy on himself about this. He thought that was the right response. Mama Cole called Nora twice more in the month after the Saturday conversation. The calls were shorter than the first one and less formally prepared, which meant they were closer to real. They were finding, cautiously, the language for whatever they were going to be to each other now. Not what they had been, which had been a false version of closeness, but not nothing either. Something was being built. Slowly, with the right materials in the correct sequence. Nora finished the Lecky building in the early spring. The completion inspection was attended by David and 3 members of his board. Nora was present with her lead associate and the project contractor. It was a professional occasion. The building had come out well, better than the plans had suggested it would, which was the best version of any commission, the version where the thing exceeds its own intentions. David walked the atrium at the end of the inspection. He stood in the center of it and looked up. The light came through the windows they had specified, a specific quality of morning light that Nora had designed the orientation of the building to receive at a particular angle. It was doing exactly what she had intended it to do. He found her near the entrance. "It's extraordinary," he said. "Thank you," she said. "The light in the atrium," he said. "You planned that." "I planned it in the first week of the commission," she said. "Before the site survey even. I knew which direction it needed to face." He looked at her. "How did you know?" "Because I knew what it needed to give the people who walked in," she said. "I told you that at the beginning. Orientation. Ground to stand on. I knew what quality of light would do that. It just had to be built around it." He was quiet for a moment. I want to be clear that I'm not. Rita and I we're still working it out," he said. The sentence came out slightly broken, which was unusual for him, and which she understood was honesty rather than carelessness. "I'm not standing here to make any kind of. I just wanted to say that what you built here, that it matters, that it was the right thing." "I know," she said. "Buildings either are or they aren't. This one is." He nodded. At the door he stopped. He turned back. "The proportion question," he said. "The one I couldn't locate. For 10 years. Whether the room I was in had the right proportions." "Yes," she said. "I understand it now," he said. "What it was." He left. Nora stood in the atrium of the building she had designed for the company of the man who had married her sister in her place, and she looked at the light doing what she had planned for it to do, and she thought about what it meant to build something true in conditions that were not. She thought, "Every building I have ever made was built in conditions that were not right. The money was wrong, or the timeline was wrong, or the brief was incomplete, or the site was more complicated than the survey suggested. That is the condition of building. You build anyway. You use what you have. You find the light and you orient toward it and you let the rest of the structure follow." She thought, that is also the condition of a life. She gathered her things. She walked out of the building into the early spring Lagos morning. Warm already, bright already. The city at its particular volume, indifferent as ever to what had just been resolved inside these walls. She had the next commission starting Monday. She went to prepare for it. There is something this story wants to say before it closes. It is not about who married whom or about what was arranged and then disrupted, or about the specific shape of what was lost and what was recovered. Those things happened, and they matter, and this story has not pretended otherwise. But what it is actually about is this: what happens to the people who are moved like pieces on a board and then have to build a life from wherever they land. Rita landed in a marriage she did not choose and made it real through 10 years of genuine labor. The realness of what she built does not erase the wrongness of how it started. But the wrongness of how it started does not erase the realness of what she built. Both things are true. Both things get to be true at the same time, which is more honest than most endings allow. Nora landed in nothing. In the absence of the life that had been arranged for her, she built something entirely her own. She built it without knowing what she had lost, which meant she built it toward what she actually wanted rather than toward what had been decided for her. Whether that is compensation or gift is a question this story leaves open, because the honest answer is that it is both. And David spent 10 years in a room with the wrong proportions and did not know it until a woman who designed buildings for a living walked into a site visit and stood in the space he was asking her to build and told him what she was trying to give the people who entered it. Ground to stand on. He is still finding his. This is allowed. Takes time to orient after the room has been wrong for a long time. It takes time to identify where the light is coming from when you have been facing the wrong direction for years. But the orienting is possible. The light is findable. The ground, built correctly, holds. There is a question this story leaves you with. The arrangement that moved these three people, the financial clause, the family decision, the 5 in the morning panic, was made by people who believed they were protecting something that mattered. They were not wrong that the thing mattered. They were wrong about the method. How many arrangements are being made right now? Not in boardrooms, not in dramatic moments, but in quiet conversations between parents and in the assumptions families make about what their children will accept, that are moving people into rooms with the wrong proportions. And how many of those people are spending their lives trying to name the feeling, the slight wrongness they cannot locate, The sense that the furniture is correct but something in the scale of it is off. They are not imagining it. The room is wrong. The question is what they do next.